From KCRW, I'm Kim Masters, and this is The Business.
When a movie doesn't work, everybody points fingers at everybody else.
Absolutely.
When a movie works, everybody points fingers at themselves.
Right.
I'm neither of those guys. So, I'm here and I'm saying, when a movie doesn't work, put it on me. I'm the writer-director of the movie didn't connect with audiences, that's on me.
A big flop is painful even to the most successful filmmakers. That didn't stop writer-producer Simon Kinberg from sharing exclusively with The Business his perspective on what went wrong with Dark Phoenix. Kinberg has worked as a writer and producer on the X-Men movie franchise since 2006. He wrote Dark Phoenix, and it was his directorial debut. The film got panned by critics and opened to only $33 million in the U.S., the lowest of any of the X-Men movies. He tells us about the reshoots, release date changes, and working at Fox as it was being swallowed by Disney. But first on the news banter, is Game of Thrones a category killer? Stick around, it's The Business from KCRW. I am joined by my buddy in banter, Matt Bellany of The Hollywood Reporter. Hello, Matt.
Hi there.
So, Matt, Emmy voting is underway. The drama category, I think some of the otherwise competitive shows, which are now starting to come onto your screens, might have been there sooner, except that they are looking at Game of Thrones, which is considered potentially something that will dominate and win. It's obviously had an amazing run, major ratings, major cultural impact, and certain shows just did not want to be in a category with them this time.
Yeah, that's been the most competitive category at the Emmys in this so-called peak TV era, the Outstanding Drama Series. But this year you saw shows like Handmaid's Tale, which is the first show from a streaming service to win in this category, and Stranger Things from Netflix. Both of them bypassed that Emmys window and are premiering in June and July. And most people believe it's because they're getting out of the way of Game of Thrones, which is the presumptive favorite to win in that category as a coronation of sorts for the entirety of the series, despite the fact that there was some negativity around that final stretch of episodes.
Yeah, I'm not somebody who actually got into the Game of Thrones habit, but the blowback that I saw just on social media was considerable. People just did not think they stuck the landing. Whether that costs them, I don't know, but, potentially it could. I mean, it would be a backfire to hold your series and then find out that Game of Thrones was vulnerable, but I'm not so sure it really was.
Yeah, and it's really an embarrassment of riches for a lot of these outlets that have so many prestige type shows. If you look at the other category that is just booming right now is the limited series category. And this was a category that the Academy all but abandoned a few years ago because there weren't enough limited series. They combined it with made-for-TV movies. Now, you can't even fit the amount of shows into this category. You've got When They See Us, the Central Park 5 miniseries that's getting a lot of attention. You've got Chernobyl from HBO. You have Escape at Dannemora, the big Showtime project. You have Fosse Verdon from FX that critics loved. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Look at the George Clooney project, Catch-22 at Hulu. That was a big critical favorite. So, it's just such an overflowing category because so many top actors want to work in the limited series world because you don't have to commit to a long-term series. You can just make the limited series and put it out there, and you get actors like Amy Adams in Sharp Objects or Michelle Williams and Sam Rockwell in Fosse Verdon. I mean, these are A-list film actors that are doing television in the limited series genre.
Yeah, so we see as these people try to differentiate themselves from each other, some of these outlets are making some, I would say using dubious metrics to make some claims. I mean, HBO is making a claim for Chernobyl, and Netflix is making a claim for Ava DuVernay's When They See Us. I'm not so sure if that stands up to scrutiny.
No, I mean, a lot of claims during Emmy season kind of fall into the puffery category of campaigning. Netflix is claiming that the Central Park 5 miniseries has been the most watched series on the service every day since it debuted, and that's all nice to say, but Netflix does not provide third-party verified ratings, so are we supposed to trust them? I don't. Then HBO said something like Chernobyl is the highest rated miniseries it's ever done, but then they are citing this IMDb ranking of critics and responses that I don't really understand. So, it's Emmy season. Everybody is trying to break through. It's why when you drive around Los Angeles in May and June, you see billboards for shows that haven't been on the air in months. It's because everybody's trying to gin up goodwill and familiarity, awareness for these shows that Emmy voters are voting for.
Yeah. I mean, on the other hand, however dubious those claims, we can say that these shows have had tremendous cultural impact. I'm particularly thinking of When They See Us. We've seen Linda Fairstein, who ran the sex crimes unit in New York, being hounded out of her foundation and other jobs now, and one of the top prosecutors losing a teaching job, and who knows from where, So you certainly can see that whether these claims are overblown about who's watching what, the impact of entertainment in the real world can be pretty dazzling. Meanwhile, Netflix, I feel like we just talk about Netflix or have Netflix shows, Netflix, but we can't help it. We're going to talk about the other streamers more and more as they come online. But what we are seeing in Europe is interesting. We are seeing various European TV broadcasters joining together from different countries, Italy, Germany, Netherlands, France, trying to battle the obvious challenge from Netflix and other streamers, not just Netflix.
Yeah, this is a big high-level issue right now. With the rise of global platforms, right now it's mostly Amazon and Netflix, but Disney Plus is coming, Apple, Warner Media. The television business is shifting to a global platform business. And in Europe, it's causing a lot of freak out. And these European TV powers that for decades have enjoyed these territory by territory businesses are now being forced to compete with streamers that operate in all the territories. And how are they doing that? They're doing it by trying to create hyper local programming that they believe they know their audience better than some of these global programmers. And then they're also trying to do these awkward alliances where an Italian broadcaster will do a deal with a German broadcaster. And the goal is to create synergies and alliances that can help them get bigger and compete with these global streamers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to quote a London-based analyst who said that they do not have the resources to compete alone against global players like Netflix. And if they don't stick together, Netflix will have them for dinner one by one. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
That's Matt Bellany, editorial director of The Hollywood Reporter. In the new X-Men movie Dark Phoenix, the blue-skinned Mystique, played by Jennifer Lawrence, rallies her fellow mutants, including Cyclops, played by Ty Sheridan, to save a group of astronauts in trouble.
It's a simple extraction. We go into space, we get the astronauts, we bring them home. Any questions?
Yeah, like 1,000.
We don't have time for 1,000.
Of course, it's not that simple. They save the astronauts, but Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner, gets stranded. She survives with intensified telekinetic powers. Dark Phoenix was written and directed by our guest today. Simon Kinberg is a prolific writer-producer. In addition to the X-Men movies, he wrote Mr. and Mrs. Smith and produced such diverse projects as The Martian and Disney's live-action Cinderella. Kinberg has been involved with Fox's X-Men franchise since 2006, when he wrote X-Men: The Last Stand. He went on to produce X-Men First Class in 2011. He also wrote and produced X-Men Days of Future Past and X-Men Apocalypse. Both of those films were directed by Bryan Singer, though Kinberg had to help get the movies finished when Singer went AWOL. Dark Phoenix was Kinberg's chance to take full control behind the camera, but opening weekend brought no cause for celebration. Critics panned the film, and it wiped out at the box office, finishing Behind the Secret Life of Pets 2 and grossing just $33 million. Here you are, the week after a weekend.
Yeah.
And you feel like it's not going to kill you to talk about it.
It's not going to kill me to talk about it. It's not going to kill me because I actually really like the movie. I had an amazing time making the movie. And I remember I had this conversation with Ridley Scott when we were in China doing promotion for The Martian. And I asked him what his favorite movie was that he'd worked on, and he said G.I. Jane. And I kind of thought he was kidding.
Right. Because
obviously that movie's not as successful as Alien or Blade Runner or all of his masterpieces. And he said it was his favorite because it was just a great process and he learned a lot in the process of making it. And I've thought about that a lot over the years, and I thought about it a whole lot over the last weekend and the weeks and months that preceded it. This weekend for me was certainly more disappointing than I had anticipated, but I was anticipating or bracing for a tough weekend based on the tracking and just the feeling that you can get in the culture. And I'd always felt that we had a tough date for this particular movie. And I think
you say that, but it feels like it should be a classic, superhero summer movie.
Well, I think it wasn't made as a classic superhero movie. It was made as more of a dramatic, intimate smaller film that originally was going to come out in November and then was going to come out in February. And those were the dates that I felt like actually it would have felt more appropriate to. And I think also coming out 5-6 weeks after what will be the biggest or second biggest movie in the history of cinema that happens to be also in the genre of superheroes was tough for us. And I always anticipated it was going to be tough to be in the tailwinds of that movie.
Right.
So, those things for me always felt like it was a tough weekend, but I wouldn't blame it on the weekend. Like, it clearly is a movie that didn't connect with audience that didn't see it. It didn't connect enough with audiences that did see it. So that's on me. And, when you make movies, and you know this better than I do, you can't control what's going to happen to the movie once you let it out into the world.
I will differ that I actually don't know that better than you do, but I do know that.
No, you do. You've been around more. You've watched it and studied it more than I have.
I've seen a few things go wrong.
And I've had movies, I've had movies that have failed spectacularly, and I've had movies that have succeeded spectacularly, and I've been surprised in both directions. And so for me, I think what I try to take from the wins and the losses are the lessons. And I try not to get too high or too low, because otherwise you are so dependent on something you can't control that you can go a little crazy. And I've seen it drive people crazy. And I've also seen it make people start to retreat into what they think people want to see rather than continue to make movies that they themselves are passionate about.
I mean, is there an overarching, the mistake was?
I don't think there was a singular mistake. I think the combination or pileup of challenges that this movie went through led to a really disappointing weekend. And, these days in general, it's harder and harder to get people to come to the movie theater. There's just better things things on television, movies that are straight to streaming. You're seeing movie stars in straight to streaming movies. So the notion of getting people to come to the theater is hard. So anytime you give yourself an obstacle to that, it's hard to overcome that obstacle. And when a movie has a series of obstacles that span over a year, it's very, very hard.
Well, let's step back a bit. You've been with this thing. I had to make myself like a whiteboard with lots of lines and photographs because the X-Men universe and its offshoots, my brain cannot retain this information. And it's not just you guys. I have a whiteboard
like that, yeah.
Yeah. But so you go back to 2006.
The movie came out in 2006. I started writing X-Men: The Last Stand probably in somewhere around 2003, because by the time the movie comes out, obviously, the writing's 2-3 years before the movie's released.
Right. So that's Brett Ratner directing X-Men: Last Stand.
Yeah. And
this is, I don't know if you knew at the time, the beginning of a long relationship with that universe. Was that what you foresaw?
I did not foresee. I haven't foreseen, I think, anything in my career. I've just been drawn to the things I've been drawn to without much of a larger strategy. But I grew up reading X-Men comics, and so I was excited to work in that universe. And I think my excitement about the universe and my love for the comics gave the studio a certain level of confidence. And so they kept me around. And then you can run down the list, but then it was X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, X-Men Apocalypse, this X-Men Dark Phoenix. And then the offshoot said Pull 1 and 2 and Logan. Those are the ones that I worked on. I can't do the math in my head, but I think it's something like 10 movies over 15 years, which is a lot.
These movies, I should say in fairness, at the threshold, always are enormously complicated, always have reshoots, always have problems.
I think the truth is, on all of these movies of this kind of scale these days, and for a while now, there are inevitable reshoots because of just the complexity of making the film. And, Marvel Studios really brilliantly builds into their model reshoots. So they budget and schedule, as far as I know, reshoots so that they know they're going to have the cast back for a certain amount of time. But, I think the other part of reshoots is not just that the movies are complicated and big, and so they need, things to fill in the gap. It's that you have the luxury of having reshoots. I think if you were to ask anybody making a $1 million movie, hey, would you like $200,000 worth of reshoots? It's absolutely.
Right.
The same way that, like, every time I write a script, I'm not shooting the first draft. I iterate the script. It's one of the reasons the Pixar movies are, like, consistently so great. They're iterating those movies in what their equivalent to reshoots are. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we have seen examples where reshoots really do save a movie.
Hey, on that list of movies I just mentioned in the X-Men universe, without naming names, a few of them did.
Well, so I'll name a name.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I mean, you have had, as it happens, two directors who are now more or less in disgrace in Brett Ratner and Bryan Singer. I don't know if Brett Ratner, I don't know that he was or wasn't any kind of trouble making these movies, but he seems to have phased out more or less by the time you really get deep into it.
I think that was always for Brett a one and done kind of movie. I don't think he was imagining he was taking over the franchise from Brian. And I will say that was a movie that didn't have, we had reshoots on that movie like you do inevitably on every film of the scale, but that was not a film that was a particularly troubled process. And, you know, like I've been on a lot of movies that were troubled. I mean, you've written articles about movies that were troubled that we didn't have conversations about. And sometimes they're great movies, and sometimes they're not.
I mean, I just will say, sometimes the studios will say to me, why are you writing about this troubled movie? And I feel like if the movie ultimately works, as we saw with World War Z, they had to reshoot the whole third act, I think.
Yeah,
and guess what? They fixed it.
No, and all the reports about Rogue One, and you know, my experience was the first movie I ever made was Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
I did write about that one.
I remember you wrote an article about that one.
Very hot mess.
It was a complicated process, I will say, and it had a lot of reshoots involved, and it was a very successful movie that people still watch and love.
People still watch and love. So it's not the kiss of death by any means. It's more. But then Bryan Singer reappears again. And Bryan Singer, by then, is a troubled guy who, by reputation, vanishes routinely, and others have to step in.
You know, Bryan definitely in his process, it is a more collaborative process, and there are people that do.
That is a very generous way.
Well, and there are people that I've been around a lot of directors actually who were like.
Oh, but to be clear, his reputation is he goes away.
I know his reputation. Yeah, no. There were definitely times in the movies that we made together where others would have to step in to help, and you know, I was one of those people for sure.
I feel obligated to ask, did these reports of his behavior, which go on for years, did that ever hit your radar? Or did you say, it's just not my business? Or
his behavior in terms of his personal life?
Yes.
Not my business, not something that I saw on set or in the workplace. Otherwise, I would have felt like it was my business.
Of course. I hope. Yeah.
For sure. No, for sure. And, you know, those movies were complicated to make. They were oftentimes hard to make. And then oftentimes, and this is not to excuse any behavior, sometimes they were really good. I mean, X-Men Days of Future Past, the first X-Men movie I made with Bryan as a director, is my favorite of the X-Men movies, certainly that I've made, and might be my favorite of the X-Men movies. So,
it seems to be the thing with him, you know, it's a big process, and then you turn around and you have a hit movie potentially on your hands.
Well, that's why, you know, I wasn't just being political when I said that, like, it's a collaborative process. Like, he has created a process that has yielded some really great products. But yeah, there's no question that the X-Men movies have always been, in my experience since I started, and I know since before I started, have always been hard movies to make.
Coming up after a short break, Simon Kinberg tells us why Dark Phoenix changed its release date twice. You're listening to The Business from KCRW. This is The Business, and I'm Kim Masters. We're talking to Simon Kinberg, writer and producer of multiple X-Men movies, and writer-producer-director of the newest X-Men film, Dark Phoenix. This entry in the Marvel mutant franchise centers around Jean Grey, played by Sophie Turner. As she grapples with the powerful forces inside her, a mysterious alien, played by Jessica Chastain, turns up.
Who are you?
The better question is, who are you? Are you a scared little girl who answers to a man in a chair? Or are you the most powerful creature on the planet?
Now that Disney has bought Fox, the X-Men will join their fellow Marvel superheroes in the house that Kevin Feige built. And Kinberg's duties on the series are essentially done. It would have been nice for Kinberg to have a hit with Dark Phoenix, which was his official directorial debut, but it was not to be. As he explained when he joined us in the studio, Dark Phoenix faced challenges almost from the beginning. You start shooting in June 2017.
Sounds about right.
You finish in October 17.
That's right.
Now you're in post, and you're like, the third act especially, I think, is not really happening.
That's right.
So you're like, we got to do some reshoots.
Right. Which I've done third act reshoots on half the movies I've worked on.
And you have that conversation, obviously, with Fox.
Mm-hmm.
You have a big famous cast.
Yes.
And you have to wait until October, like a year.
Yeah, that's right.
To get everybody together again.
That's right.
And meanwhile, I believe rumors begin that Disney is buying Fox.
Yes. Somewhere around there. I actually don't know when the rumors started, but
if I'm right, I think it's when you were initially in post-production and realizing that this.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And I wondered actually if that informed your thoughts, like, not necessarily you specifically,
Right.
like the executives at Fox. The executives at Fox were in a weird space. And
Of
the cast
course.
of characters are like Stacey Snider was the chairman, Emma Watts was the co-chairman. I'm wondering if Stacey and Emma, who I'm not suggesting they were always on the same page with this, but if Stacey Snider and Emma Watts, mindful of a problem with the film and mindful of the advent of a potential new boss, do you think that gets into their heads?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't know what happened in their heads. Emma's someone that I'm very, very close to as a friend, and obviously as someone that I've been working with for whatever it is now, 15
and
years,
I should
16
say,
years.
have made the transition to Disney while Stacey Snider has not.
And there's no question that all of those rumors, and then as those rumors became seemingly true, it's impossible if you're working at Fox to not be thinking about that. You know, Fox is a very sort of familial company, meaning a lot of people, especially in senior executives, have been there for 15, 20 years.
Yes.
You know, so
Close-knit culture and
very much. So I think there was cognizance of that. What was going on and how much of that was weighing on the minds of the people who were there, I can't begin to know.
I mean, what I have heard from other people besides you, nothing to do with your film, is that, you know, people in marketing or just start looking for jobs or leaving or not come, you know, it just becomes a real problem.
Well, there's no question that people were either getting fired or leaving.
Everybody knew Disney had its own staff and was going to have massive layoffs.
Yeah, I think the massive layoffs people were well aware of. And ultimately, especially toward the last 6 months or so, there were massive layoffs, like thousands and thousands of people.
Right.
And so, you know, the marketing, distribution, and publicity side of Fox was very heavily hit. And I noticed it because obviously I was going to marketing meetings every week and there were people who weren't there anymore.
Empty chairs.
Yeah, and there are people that I'd worked with for many years on many movies I've made. So these were people that I had relationships with and people I cared a lot about. And I cared about them and their families, honestly, as much or more than I cared about a movie. Because I have an immense amount of sympathy for someone who has been somewhere for 15, 20 years and all of a sudden is upended for a reason that has nothing to do with them.
What happens when a movie doesn't work, of course, is a little bit of finger-pointing palooza.
Right.
I don't know whether the Disney marketing people, I mean, there was a thought that they will come in and that big machine will sell the movie, but I don't know if it didn't happen at all or it just didn't take.
They're clearly the best in the world, Disney, at marketing movies. But I know that their process is usually they start from a year out of a movie's release. And in our case, they were given the film 2 months out from
because
release.
They couldn't do anything
They
until
couldn't
the
do
deal
anything
closed.
until the merger was finalized.
Which took forever. And I'm sure, a factor that at any time people were like, when is D-Day? When is the Disney closes the deal day?
Yeah, it took a long time. And as a result, Disney didn't have a long time to integrate into the marketing and the publicity of the film. Listen, I think when a movie doesn't work, everybody points fingers at everybody else.
Absolutely.
When a movie works, everybody points fingers at themselves.
Right.
I'm neither of those guys. So like I'm here and I'm saying when a movie doesn't work, put it on me. Like I'm the writer, director of the movie didn't connect with audiences, that's on me. And when a movie works, give it to Ryan Reynolds, give it to Ridley Scott, give it to whomever the audience came primarily to see because it was not me. I'm, a part of the process.
So then there is an issue of release date now. So originally November 2018, obviously that's not going to be a thing anymore with the massive reshoots. There was a thought of February 2019, and there was a report in my publication, The Hollywood Reporter, that I didn't write, but that you guys wanted that date, and Jim Cameron wanted the date. But I am told that there was no way the movie was ready by that date. Is that fair?
It's hard to know. If we had accelerated certain things in the movie, perhaps we would have been ready by that date.
With all the reshoots, all the effects, all the prep that had to go into it?
The reshoots were not as extensive as all the reshoots. I mean, it's the kind of reshoots we've done on these movies before. But having said that, we weren't released in February, so it didn't really matter.
I'm obviously getting at would it
I
have
don't
made
know.
a difference? And is it fair to say it would have done better if it really wasn't going to be ready?
There's no way to know. And that's the thing that I think can drive people crazy and keep them up and be thinking about a movie's failure years later. If the lesson you've learned is that you had the wrong date or you didn't have good marketing, that's not a lesson.
Right.
But I will say that I didn't make the movie as a summer movie. Like I made the movie to be released in November. We couldn't make that date. And then the decision was made to not release it in February. And then it was put in the middle of the heat of summer. And it's not a movie that was made for summer. It was a movie that was made for a slightly more contemplative time in the marketplace.
It's one of those things where, as you say, things that open in February also have gotten clobbered, right?
For sure. That's why trying to learn the lessons or hypothesize about theoreticals is useless.
Was there ever any connection between you and Marvel folks? They're obviously going to have X-Men back now.
Right.
Did they ever say, do you want us to take a look at it?
No. Kevin Feige and I, when I started in the X-Men universe, Kevin was one of the producers of X-Men The Last Stand, and we've been friends ever since. And he'll email me when things go well. He'll email things when things don't. And I'll email him when things go well, which is pretty much all the time in his case.
Yeah, those would be the easy ones to write.
Those are easy to write. And I saw him right before the merger closed, actually. We've never had a formal conversation about what the post-merger will look like for the Marvel movies at Disney. But I saw him right before it, and we talked about Aquaman and the Twilight Zone. We didn't talk about any of the Marvel stuff because he couldn't yet because the merger hadn't closed.
I mean, you've been through some hits and misses, but as we said in the beginning, this was the first one that you directed. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it is a different experience as a director. Do people send you nice notes, or is there a silence?
They send nice notes. I mean, you know me a little bit and probably have gleaned this over the years. Like, I'm a decent guy, and I'm the guy that writes notes to other people when their films don't do well. And so in a moment like this, I get probably 75% as many emails as when the movies work. They're just harder emails to write. I don't
know how to do those.
They're hard.
What would you like to get as an email? What's your favorite one that you got?
My favorite one I got was from Tim Miller. Actually, who's the director of Deadpool, who is probably
one, not two.
Yeah, who's probably the harshest on comic book adaptations. And I saw him at the premiere of the movie, and I was like, "Oh God, I wish you weren't here. Like, I'm so stressed out. Now you're going to hate the movie." And he didn't hate the movie, and he just wrote, a feeling that in the test of time, people will come to see the movie differently, and out of the context of this particular moment, see things in it that they will appreciate and that he appreciated as a fan. And it just was a little bit more than the keep your chin up and you've had so many successes, it's okay to take a loss every now and then kind of emails. Those are easier to write. Those are a little more pro forma.
Are you at all relieved? Like, I'm done with the damn X-Men.
Well, I'm not relieved because I do love the characters. The process of making these movies has been very difficult. And so, I definitely feel like I'm excited to move into a space where it doesn't have a legacy of difficulty. But having said that, I love these characters. I'll be super excited to see what Marvel does with them. I'm excited about the things I have ahead of me that aren't necessarily X-Men related.
Got a movie for Universal coming up?
Yeah, I literally leave in a week to go start shooting a movie in 4 weeks, directing a movie for Universal.
I don't quite know how you manage your life, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah, that's probably more a conversation for you and my therapist to explore. But so yeah, I mean, I'm not relieved, but always when I'm done with something, there's a measure of like, exhale.
This is like an epic done with something. This is a very long relationship with this
It's a
material.
very long relationship with these characters, for sure. That's different than just, finishing The Martian and feeling like, okay, there's not probably going to be a Martian 2.
Although I would be there for that.
I'm glad for that.
Simon Kinberg is the writer and producer of many movies, including Dark Phoenix, which he also directed. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you. Always good to talk to you.
And that's The Business. Caitlin Parker produced and edited today's program with production assistance from Paul Smith. You can subscribe to The Business as well as other great KCRW podcasts at kcrw.com/podcasts. I'm Kim Masters. We'll see you next week on The Business.